One thing that I plan on doing if I am elected to this seat, which I think is really important, because in this district we have a high level of political activity from one end to the other, from Roslindale to Norwood. It's important that elected officials are seen, that they're active, not just every 2 years during election years. I've pledged to the district as a whole, something I've done is to continue having district office hours on a very regular basis, so that folks who have issues don't get a phone line or an email, but rather can see me directly face to face. So that's something I plan on doing, to be extremely as accessible as anyone.
Well, I've lived next to Marion Walsh for 15 years, and she's a nice lady, but I think she and I disagree on how to get Massachusetts moving. She has largely voted for every tax increase that's ever come across the floor of the Senate. I see that hurting our jobs. I see that hurting our communities. We've seen a lot of the cost of living go up during her tenure, and I see a different vision of lower taxes, a much more business-friendly atmosphere if I'm elected to the state Senate. And I do think her constituent services have been rather weak, and that's something that I'm very committed to as well. I think in West Roxbury people have also thought Representative Rush's constituent services have been rather weak, if you don't know him personally.
The people who know me best have been the people in West Roxbury and Roslindale. They know that I'm actively involved in the community, that I show up to meetings all the time, that I'm very visible. People see me at Dunkin' Donuts, they see me at Roach Brothers, they see me at CVS. I hold weekly office hours, and I have really prided myself in my current rep district at being accessible, available, and it's something that I learned as a young man in West Roxbury with elected officials who are similar to that. I've been fortunate enough because although I represent the 10th Suffolk District, it's actually the 10th Suffolk Norfolk District. I've represented part of Norfolk County since I've got elected, and in that capacity I've had the chance to build very strong relationships with the District Attorney Bill Keating, with the Sheriff Mike Bellotti, with the Norfolk County Commissioners, because a lot of the issues we do just don't affect your own rep district, they affect larger areas. So I've had great relationships with county officials in Norfolk County, as well as the other state reps who live in the other parts of the Norfolk County.
I moved here in the summer of 1993 after college. I actually lived in Norwood for 2.5 years. I did eventually build and buy a house in West Roxbury, but I've lived in Norwood. I worked at a Volvo dealership on Route 1 in Dedham for 5 years. That's very significant for this district because obviously if you've ever been down to the Auto Mile, that's one of the most significant industries for this district. So I have a lot of experience working in Dedham, living in Norwood as well as West Roxbury, and it is a big district. And one thing I noted looking at Mike's numbers is that he lost all of Norfolk County in the primary. And that is probably an area where I will do very well, partly because of my experience with that part of the district. The Norfolk County part of this district usually feels that a big city Democrat this district is designed for a big city Democrat to win it. And obviously I'm running as a Republican, and so I think out there that actually means more to them. And I do want to have a district office in the district so people know that there's always a presence.
As you know, I did have a primary opponent with a Norfolk County address, and there were a fair amount of people I talked to who said they would prefer having somebody represent them who lived in the Norfolk County section of the district. And I guess I understand that if somebody were to say that. But I worked very, very hard and will continue to do so. And, like I said, I've built a very good relationship with many Norfolk County elected officials and will continue that if I'm fortunate enough to be elected to the Senate.
Jobs are the #1 concern. And I feel that my experience being 18 years in the private sector, working for 3 small firms, including one in the district, having an MBA, having to make payroll, having to think about hiring decisions, gives me a unique perspective on the business aspect and the jobs aspect that somebody who's been in government his whole career doesn't have.
Sure, I would agree that jobs obviously are the important, not only for a Senate race, but they're the most important issue we're facing statewide. But somebody who is a state senator for this district, the most important thing is that there's a high level of advocacy, a high level of energy, that they are visible. They are constantly working, not just on Beacon Hill, but in the district from end to end, hearing their constituents' concerns, dealing with local elected officials to make sure that in this bad economy that towns are doing the best they can, specifically with local aid and Chapter 70 funds. Those are things that people care about from one end of the district to the other, and to me, those are my priorities. First and foremost, I have a record. I voted in favor of casino gambling here in Massachusetts, and I think it's an it's economically reckless that we don't have adult gaming, as many of our neighboring states do and are doing very well by it. I voted in favor of a plan that calls for multiple casinos as well as slots at the racetrack. Always being mindful, and the discussion always goes around across the aisle amongst most of my colleagues, is the idea of having making sure there is money set aside from the profits that made for the state to help folks who do have a gambling addiction, much like we have programs in this state to help people with alcohol addiction.
On casinos, I am for casinos. I do think that they will provide construction jobs and ongoing jobs in the industry. But I think one of my big concerns with casinos is that the legislature is looking at casinos and saying this is going to generate hundreds of millions of dollars of new tax revenue each year, and it's going to enable them to kick the can down the road and avoid making some tough decisions that they've been not making the last couple of years, as we've seen with the last 2 or 3 budgets passed. I was very frustrated this summer when they adjourned by a voice vote the session July 31st when they hadn't passed casinos. It's been 3 years now, 3 or 4 years, and by voice vote they adjourned and went on vacation and hit the campaign trail. The people have been waiting for this for 3 years.
You know, there have been many of us, myself included, who have been fighting hard. And again, when you are in the legislature, there are 200 members. It's not one person making all the decisions. I've been somebody who's been very vocal, both in my district and at the State House as a state representative, to let people know that having adult gaming, casinos, and slots at the tracks is an important economic generator. It also creates many construction jobs. 15,000 construction jobs, 10,000 permanent jobs. It's something I've been vocal about, something I've been fighting for in Beacon Hill. Will continue to do so if the people of this district send me to the State Senate.
Well, I think what I've been saying on the campaign trail, before we start removing things from the budget, let's look at what the Senate and House Republicans propose every single year. And the Democrats vote them down, refuse to even vote on them sometimes, send them off to committee, which is the final resting place of many a fine idea. Things like pension reform. We've had a broken pension system for decades here. Every year now we take $1 billion of money, tax money, throw it at the problems from 20 or 30 years ago. We haven't fixed the problem. One of the ideas with a lot of teeth is to reorganize many of our state bureaucracies. We have 100 agencies that do licensing and regulation. We have 15 that do economic development. We have 17 for health and human services. In the private sector, we see this and say, there have to be synergies and efficiencies if we combine these. And it would also make it much easier for the people who have to use these departments. I mean, we all know what it's like going to a state agency. It's pretty tough often to negotiate the bureaucracy. I'd also be in favor of outsourcing and privatizing certain state functions to save money, like many other states have done. Florida does it. First year they save $600 or $700 million by doing it. So there's a lot to do before we have to start eliminating things.
And many people do believe that we have to, under the Constitution, balance the budget. That's simply not the case. I do support, and others are speaking of putting forth a ballot initiative, ultimately a constitutional question that would say the state has to balance the budget. Far too often the budget isn't balanced, and thus harming cities and towns, local aid. In terms of cutting things, one thing that I've been looking at and would be happy, as I said when I spoke with you folks before, estimated $100 million in leases that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is partaking in terms of property leases. $100 million. That to me is excessive. I'd mentioned before I would file legislation before anything is leased on the taxpayer's dollar that the state auditor, whomever that may be elected, would have to sign off on any leases.
What he said is absolutely true. There are a lot of things to do. I mean, my disappointment, and one of the reasons I got in this race is I've looked at our budget, and I wouldn't have voted for it the last few years. We've cut local aid, we've made no real reforms, and we're plugging the budget holes with one-time revenues. It doesn't meet a fiduciary standard in my business. It's not fair to the taxpayers, and we need to do a lot better. So, you know, as I said, we haven't cut any spending for years, essentially. We've rearranged the deck furniture on the Titanic, but we haven't cut and reformed the budget. And that's really where we need to go before we even look at cutting services.
The fact of the matter is, every penny is important, and it's important that, you know, as we do this, we look behind the faces as well. There are many people working harder and getting less, and they feel very frustrated with the system as a whole. So for me, when folks are, you know, when I voted on the budget and when I'm working on folks and we're talking about issues that affect people, I think really it's important that we take this fiscally responsible approach, which I've been doing for the last 8 years, a common sense approach to our state budget.
Patronage is a significant problem in Massachusetts, a significant problem across most of our state agencies. It is something that largely exists in the public sector. In the private sector, a lot of the things that happen would be called self-dealing, insider trading, and these are all legal things. In the public sector, unfortunately, we see that, and we need to stamp it out. My opponent has been indicted by the Globe, anyway.
Indicted.
Well, by the Globe, not I won't say indicted. The Globe has spotlighted his actions with the probation department, and it's a very egregious case of patronage. And I'm not here to pick on him or his family or his friends, but what I looked at when I saw the Globe article, Representative Rush has sat on the House Ways and Means Committee. That committee makes our budget, makes the budget in the House, and the probation department budget grew 8 times faster than any other public safety agency.
I mean, that's a pretty strong word, the word indicted, really, and I haven't been indicted on anything, Brad. You know, the fact, if you want to talk about my father, who, that's my only tie to the probation department, was a probation officer 10 years before I was born, and retired 4 years ago, and to kind of insinuate that the fact that I sit on the Ways and Means Committee has anything to do with my direct dealing with the probation budget is kind of a stretch. The fact of the matter is, back to the question of patronage, does patronage exist? It exists everywhere. It exists in the private sector, it exists in the public sector. My guess is maybe even here there are people who got their jobs because they maybe possibly knew somebody, or but ultimately what it comes down to is somebody qualified for a job. That's the most important thing. And there have historically people have been put into jobs where they couldn't do the jobs. It's outrageous. Didn't have the qualifications. Outrageous. The most important thing is that those standards are met, and that's first and foremost the importance. Does patronage exist? I think it always has since government was inceptuated, and continues to. What it comes down to is somebody able and have the standards to do the job.
This is one of the most important issues of the campaign, that the spotlight came down on Mr. Rush, and I have not, I'm going to say it, I'm not picking on his family, I'm not picking on him personally. This is all I know is from what I read in the Globe, but I've also been quoted in the Globe as saying we need to stamp out tribal patronage. And when you look at what the House Ways and Means Committee did to grow the budget of the probation department, you say why? The caseload of the probation department was decreasing. Well, what happened? Their head count went through the roof. This is, you know, the Boston Foundation has talked about it. They haven't used best practices. It's going to cost us $500 million in new jails within 10 years. This is a significant issue, and if you follow all the legal briefs on it that the Globe provided, this isn't me saying it, this is the Globe and people under oath, it looks as though there's a large part of favoritism being shown by the people in government for the people who get hired there.